Executive Chamber 7, troubled mind.
Out on Main Street, towards the edge of the city, a group of former mental patients raised enough money to rent a barren office. On the 1st of April, they gathered as a citizens committee dedicated to speaking out openly and personally on what it is like to be mentally ill. Their concern, to erase the stigma from mental illness and to raise public support for adequate psychiatric services in their community. On a statewide level, this too is a vital concern of the executive chamber. Welcome. If the governor of New York was keeper of the keys to our state institutions, and they hung on a rack in the executive chamber, nobody would be looking for the keys to our state hospitals, because nobody uses them much anymore, and this is good. Traditionally, the state's function was to provide asylums that locked the mentally ill away from the world in which they could not function normally. But today, intensive treatment is provided in open state hospitals, where mental patients are treated much as if they had any sort of sickness. The recoveries from mental illness today would have seemed impossible a generation ago. Hospital stays are now shorter, and many patients are returning home to a normal and satisfying life. Prospects are bright in New York for further relief and prevention of the suffering and human waste caused by mental illness. Prospects are even brighter if newer, smaller, and specialized hospital units are built and staffed by the state, and if county and local governments will get to work on establishing community mental health centers, and perhaps above all, if a widespread public awareness develops in support of psychiatric services. But awareness, understanding, and compassion have been slow in coming. Locked or unlocked, the doors of mental illness seem to be doors of darkness through which the healthy do not see.
Before I got sick, I had done so many things. I had been a guard for President Eisenhower when I was in Washington. I'd been an athlete, big, and I was strong, and I was a bodybuilder, and suddenly this fear that I couldn't cross the street, these impulses that came that I was going to kill myself or that I would hurt myself, these crying spells. And when my appetite went, and when I'm 32 years old, and today I look 40, when this happened, I was 25 and I looked 55. I certainly didn't understand how this could happen to my body or to my brain. I didn't know what was going on. When the sun would go down at night and it would get dark, I was frightened by this, and I didn't know why.
But you don't look as sick as you feel, and everything is an effort. It's an effort to get dressed. It's an effort to go to the store. To make a phone call is torture sometimes. To have people come in makes you want to run in the bedroom and shut the door. You don't want to talk to people. You run away. You don't write the letters you should. Even your own family seems far away. They seem strange. You don't understand how they can laugh and you can feel so miserable.
A feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, the inability to function, the inability to rest or sleep.
I couldn't read a newspaper. If I saw someone dying in a paper, I was positive I was next. most of all was this overshadowing, this overbearing, this almost compulsive fear that I understand they call mental illness, that I was never going to get well, that I was always going to be this way, that I would have to be this way. I didn't understand that there were people, other people, hundreds of people like me, who also had developed this illness.
In the 4 years since we began to keep track of the treatment of psychiatric illness in Monroe County, over 20,000 persons have been reported to us. And this gives us a new case rate of better than 5,000 individuals per year. As to the type of illness, more than 1/3 of all the patients under care had a diagnosis of psychosis. That is either schizophrenic reaction, which is a withdrawal from real life into fantasy, or an affective reaction, which represents a marked variation of mood, which may range from deep depression to elation. We can conclude with reasonable certainty that better than 1 out of every 100 persons are undergoing psychiatric treatment at any one time, and that in the next 10 years, more than 1 out of every 15 persons in the county will seek psychiatric care. Now, how many more are not resorting to medical aid for psychiatric illness is yet to be determined.
As long as I can remember, I've had 2 fears. The first was that I was insane. The second was the fear that somebody would find out about it. I was afraid to go to college because I thought, now there you have to think. And if I start thinking, I'll know for sure that I'm sick. So I made up something. I got out of it. But then after I married and started having children, then the strong symptoms began. The nervous fatigue. The feeling that I simply could not move out of that bed. And you'd be amazed at how little you can do as far as taking care of children goes. I see the way some mothers run around, and I know the way my children were brought up, with a bottle stuck in the crib and me on the couch, the phone off the hook, the door chained, and that terrible isolation. But always the fear made you try and keep up in front of people. Until finally, I became so terrified that I was going to strangle one of the children, kill my husband, that I finally sought professional help.
There are 85,000 beds in our state hospitals. Many are overcrowded. Some of the buildings date back to the Civil War. But there is also great change. Several years ago, we began to take the bars off the windows and to leave most of the doors unlocked.
Good morning.
The open hospital policy, with its marked change from custodial care to intensive treatment of mental patients, followed the introduction in the mid-1950s of tranquilizers and other drugs that temporarily relieved the most crippling symptoms of a disturbed mind.
By means of controlling many of the painful symptoms, such as anxiety, depression, hostility, aggressiveness, it was possible in the hospital to begin to concentrate on many of the other programs of therapy that we were anxious to introduce over the years. Are you receiving medicine?
Yes, sir.
Do you think they helped you?
Oh, mercifully, yes.
Do you feel like going home?
Oh, who wouldn't like to go home?
Our intensive therapy program involves trained people working with the patient all day. Not only just when we hand the patient a pill, but a continuous and carefully designed, graduated program of activities which the patient can carry on without frustration and which serves to rebuild his self-esteem, to begin to enjoy interpersonal relationships with sympathetic people, and to develop new ways of meeting his problems. Most of our programs are designed toward these ends. For example, recreation is not carried out to kill time by playing, but to allow the patient to get rid of hostile emotions, batting a ball around rather than his family, and for the patient to learn again how to enjoy relating in acceptable ways with other people.
If I had it today, it'd be a relic. I'd make money selling it for an antique.
Psychotherapy develops new ways of responding to other people and helps develop insight.
And that she would say that I didn't need nobody to speak to, nobody that could understand me.
Have you ever tried honestly talking to him?
Oh, yes, I've tried talking to my parents, and every time I'd come in out of the house and I did something wrong, and I say, Mom or Dad, I want to talk to you.
Vocational rehabilitation is designed to help the patient fit into the community and into the world of work again.
Our sheltered workshop is a guided and protected work experience. We supply a variety of real work. Special attention is paid to punctuality and attendance. Our workers use time cards to sign in and out. In 1960, this was started as a phase of occupational therapy in our old storehouse building. Our contracts have changed from time to time, starting with nylon netting for fishnets, seines, pitchback ball, and tennis. Now we are making parts of shoes. All of our work is prescribed by the psychiatrist, and our patients have received great benefit in rehabilitation.
We have a number of patients who live in the state hospital and have jobs working downtown. We have another group of patients who just stays here in the hospital during the week and goes home every weekend. And still another group who come in here in the morning for treatment and then go home in the evening to live with their family. I've asked one of these patients who works downtown to come in. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you? Would you sit down, please? Elizabeth, where do you work?
At Rep Southern Tier Freight Line.
I see. What do you do there?
I'm a bookkeeping machine operator.
Very nice. How do you like your work?
Oh, I enjoy it very much.
How long have you been doing it?
For 2 months.
For 2 months. That means since December?
That's right.
I see. What are your plans for the future?
To eventually leave the hospital.
Currently, it costs New York State $11 a day for the first 150 days of intensive care and $7 a day thereafter for each patient, as compared to $40 a day or more in private and community hospitals. More than half of the patients in our state hospitals pay in whole or in part toward the cost of their care.
In the western part of New York, there are about 8,500 patients in our state hospitals. The job of our office here is to review the financial status of the patients and his families. First, we must try to determine if the patient has funds of his own which will pay for his stay at the hospital. These funds could be savings, stocks, bonds, medical insurance, Social Security, disability or retirement, pensions, and so on. We talk to the families of the patient to determine what part they can reasonably pay, fully aware that the families may be hard-pressed due to the hospitalization of the wage earner. Each case is treated separately and with absolute confidence. Beyond this office, no one knows, not even the doctors who are treating the patients, which patients are reimbursing the state.
There are sobering figures to consider, statistical, financial, especially human figures, in calculating what to do about mental illness. They indicate the unquestionable need and the direction of the long-range mental hygiene building program I announced recently. We intend to modernize the more obsolete of our 19 state hospitals with an eye towards future specialized roles for each institution. Some will be used mainly for long-term patients whose condition does not respond in, say, 2 years of treatment. Other existing state hospitals, especially those near the centers of population, will be reorganized into 1,000-bed units, for this has proven to be an efficient size for the professional team, that is, doctors, specialists, and attendants, giving the intensive care. New construction will further the same plan for intensive care hospitals near population centers. This year, work will begin on the 1,000-bed unit in Staten Island and one in the Capital District near Albany. Next year, 1,000-bed units are planned for Syracuse and Brooklyn. Cost of construction, I might mention, does not come out of the general tax monies, but is financed through the Mental Hygiene Facilities Improvement Fund. The funds received from patients and their families toward the cost of their medical care in state hospitals. Construction this year also calls for the building of 5 children's units in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Manhattan, and in Suffolk County. And later, 8 more children's units are scheduled in the building program. For it is among the children that you find some of the most heart-rending breakdowns and some of the most heartwarming cures. The 1,000-bed intensive care hospitals and the children's units will stand square in the middle of our fight against mental illness. On one hand, they will be backed up by those state hospitals reserved for long-range care. On the other hand, the 1,000-bed units will be backing up community mental health centers that would provide the first line of medical help for disturbed people, so that while receiving treatment, a patient need not be separated from his family and his friends. But community health centers may be the hardest link to forge in the chain of care for the mentally ill. For local psychiatric services are just getting started across the state, and public opinion necessary for their support has not yet become aroused.
Mental illness isn't a myth. It shows up as delinquency, alcoholism, narcotic addiction, severe paralyzing depression, sudden outbursts of bizarre behavior, suicide, homicide. Mental illness doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is nurtured by all the conditions in a community that place intolerable stress upon individuals, by poverty, racial segregation, overcrowding, broken families, by a disintegration of yesterday's moral values and a lack of firm new values to replace them.
We have approximately 25 emergency psychiatric admissions at this hospital a week. For instance, earlier today, I received one of approximately 2 suicide cases that we usually get a day. This particular patient was a registered nurse.
Many of these patients and their families do not realize the importance and the significance of psychiatry and joke about it until something really happens to them, and then they're really hit with this catastrophic thing.
I had a 14-year-old boy who wasn't suicidal, he was rather homicidal. He was brought in by 4 large policemen and assured us he would murder his father as soon as he left the hospital.
If a physical disease, such as tuberculosis, had such a high incidence in our community, you would see no time wasted to combat it. But mental illness, which is in a sense just as dangerous, goes largely unrecognized. In this metropolitan area, with a population of over 1.5 million, we have less than 1 psychiatrist to 25,000 people, and not a much greater proportion of psychologists and psychiatric social workers.
What did you do? Just punch him with a fist? And were you called to the principal? And then what happened?
I had to go home.
You had to go home? Now let me talk to Mommy and Daddy, okay? All right.
Our clinic and hospital services have waiting lists of months before an adult, or even worse, before a child, can get professional help.
Paul, I'll see you later. Paul has been having trouble because of difficulties in school, taking things from other children, lying to the teachers. He got in difficulties at home, instigating the other children to run away. The school at this point cannot cope with the situation very well anymore, and that is why the parents came to the child guidance clinic, but had to be told that the waiting list is 50 children long, which would mean a waiting period of at least 3-4 months or longer. This is not a child who would need a state hospital because he is not psychotic, but he cannot be kept at home under the condition, and that we would have to have for him residential treatment center. Now, a residential treatment center is not available, and if we would put Paul on the waiting list of the 1 or 2 which do exist, it might take a year before he even would be considered, and then we would not be certain that he can be admitted.
I'm very much upset because of the fact that we don't have the facilities around here in this area or in Erie County that I know of that we can take care of a problem such as my boy. My child is a very high-strung and temperamental child, which is quite a disobedient youngster. We have tried to cope with the situation, and we are not able to do so. We need professional help to take care of this problem. What do you have to say about this, Sylvia?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of opinion. It's a necessity because when our boy is on the waiting list or when we're waiting for him to get the help, he's getting worse. And there just isn't anything we can do. We don't have the knowledge or the ability to help him, and he needs the help. It's something that we've got to have.
We have a new children's unit at Meyer Memorial Hospital. That is, we have 4 walls of an 8-bed children's psychiatric unit. We don't have the beds, we don't have furniture or equipment. Most importantly, we don't have a staff to run a program for disturbed youngsters who might be treated here. A combination of not enough money for psychiatric service and too much red tape prevents us from assembling a psychiatric team to work here. I'm a child psychiatrist. I've been here since last August. That's 8 months, and I'm still trying to assemble a staff.
The medical profession now has the ability not only to treat the serious cases of mental illness that come into our emergency wards, but we could prevent severe disturbances, severe suffering through early diagnosis, early treatment. This can best be done at the local level, in the community, and that is just where mental health facilities and staff are most inadequate today.
There are not nearly enough local mental health clinics in New York State, as you can see from this map. Some counties have none. Under existing law, the state pays half the operating expense of locally sponsored psychiatric facilities. Pending the recommendations of our statewide committee on mental hygiene, I will propose legislation that state funds also be made available for 1/3 of the construction cost of local mental health centers. But for either operating expense or construction, communities still have to appropriate their share of the monies, and this, unfortunately, is slow in happening. Public attitudes still seem to regard mental illness as something to be hidden and not dealt with locally. Our new state hospital admission law, which goes into effect on September 1st, should remove some of the lingering stigma. Patients will be admitted voluntarily upon recommendation of the physicians. Court orders and court commitments will not be a part of the admission procedure anymore. While the need is great for more psychiatric facilities throughout the state, there is no reason to become alarmed that some strange malady is sweeping New York, out of proportion to our growing population. Some causes of mental illness may have come with modern times, intense competition, overcrowding, rapid change. But most causes are not new. Emotional tension, poverty, organic diseases of the brain, and just plain growing old. What is rapidly expanding is medical recognition of and ability to deal with abnormal behavior. Thus, to do more for the mentally ill, which means to spend more, will not only be giving people who were once written off as lost a chance to get along in life, but also, through effective mental hygiene, we may be making a frontal attack on criminal behavior, narcotics addiction, alcoholism, delinquency, school dropouts, on a long list of social problems that concern everyone.
I certainly hope, through what I'm saying today, that other men of 25 that had my physical stature and stamina, when they have breakdowns, there will be some place for them to go.
So I finally volunteered to go into the state hospital. I was only there 3 months and showed such an improvement that they discharged me.
And I'm gradually recovering and getting back my self-confidence, self-assurance, and the ability to function in the business world.
I thank God today that I am able to work. I work for the YMCA. I am able to function, and I just thank God.
I know that people who haven't been through it can't understand, but I also know now, and the thing I'm so convinced of, is that there does not have to be any shame connected with this illness, because we are not responsible. And until we, as patients and former patients, get this idea through our head, people who haven't been through it aren't going to understand that there is no stigma.
A few good people willing to put their pride in their pockets and talk openly of mental illness at a time when the public needs to know and needs to act. A very special citizens committee with a hand-lettered sign on the door of an unfurnished office somewhere on Main Street. Their voices have been heard.